Today we're going over some super cool stuff, shooting and moving, or shooting then moving. Shooting and moving is a very fun skill to practice, but it's an extremely difficult skill to master and to be able to use effectively. For instance, think of how difficult it is just to take a full glass of water from the fridge and walk over to the couch without spilling it. That same difficulty applies to keeping your firearm stable and your sight picture on target while your body is floating around beneath it. This is one of those skills that you really have to understand why you're using it. That's because the risk-reward ratio of shooting and moving doesn't often benefit the shooter, meaning that in a real-life context, it's not a linear relationship between your ability to place rounds on target while moving and their ability to place rounds back on you. If I am shooting and moving and my subject is stationary, it is exponentially harder for me to land rounds on that target while I'm moving than for them to return rounds on me while they are stationary. If you think of how easy it is for us to throw a ball to someone that is running, or how we can track someone with our finger while they are moving, the same ease of use applies to shooting a moving target. Now on the flip side, shooting a target while moving is an entirely different ballgame that is exponentially more difficult. With that in mind, it may be a better game plan to move very fast to a new position and shoot from a stable platform than to compromise your shooting platform to a high degree and lose a lot of potential for good hits while only making it slightly harder for your opponent to shoot back at you. So we have to think about that cost benefit of shooting and moving, whether that's in competition or in a real life context. Now in the real life context, the data does show that a vast majority of shootings do occur at close range with a large string of fire and one or both people moving. In the competition side of things, we don't often see a competitor shooting and moving unless they're pretty easy targets with a large acceptable scoring area that the competitor is pretty confident that they can hit while shooting and moving. And those easy targets often correlate with the same distance or difficulty that you're confident point shooting at. When we're talking about shooting and moving, we also have to consider how much movement is beneficial based on the context. A lot of agency quals have the shooter drawing and stepping to the right or stepping to the left in the courses of fire. And this isn't necessarily to avoid return fire, but more so to get the shooter thinking of moving or getting to a piece of cover once they're engaging a target. Those one or two steps you take during the draw may not be beneficial for you if they're slowing down your hits on target or your sight picture. On the flip side, if we're standing one or two steps away from a piece of cover and we can obtain that piece of cover while drawing and obtaining our sight picture, that is very beneficial for us in a real life context. For instance, if we look at a competition or real life context where a shooter is moving between two positions or two positions of cover and they have a target in between, is it beneficial for that shooter to maintain a rough and inaccurate sight picture between the two positions, or to beat feet as fast as they can between the two positions and obtain a sight picture when they get there? This is something you often see in a military or law enforcement setting where you have a shooter or group of shooters moving from position to position. While they're doing so, they'll be keeping a sight picture on a window or threat area, and during that time they're moving at a speed that they're not able to land accurate rounds if a threat presented itself. The question then presents itself based on the context: do we slow down to maintain a sight picture and be able to land accurate rounds, or do we speed up and negate the sight picture to get from position to position quicker? Obviously the scenario dictates what is best, but once you get out to the range and you start shooting and moving, you'll determine how accurate you can be while doing so and then apply that to those scenarios. We can then use that data to determine when it is beneficial for us to shoot and move or when it's just beneficial for us to move. All right, now that I've ranted about the context of shooting and moving, let's get into how to actually do that more effectively. When we think of walking with that aforementioned glass of water, the first thing we normally do is try to absorb that bounce to keep the water from splashing over the side of the cup. Generally, this equates to us bringing our arms in closer to our body to absorb a little of the shock of our step and to start moving heel to toe or toe to heel if we're walking backwards. We also start sitting down more in our stance. We also want to make sure that our upper body is not leaning out in front of our feet. We want to make sure that our feet get there first and our body trails behind. Also make sure that you're not worrying about timing your shots with your actual steps. this is not going to work out for you. In a real life context, you obviously can't determine where your feet are going to have to go or when you're going to have to pull the trigger. Same as in a competition setting, you'd have to be impossibly good to be able to pace yourself out between positions and where you're going to shoot with your feet. Don't do that. Instead, just like we talked about with that natural wobble zone, we just want to try to build consistent and smooth movement so that we can keep that wobble zone in a general area that we're prepared for. The way to train this to build that consistent movement is to keep a sight picture on the target while moving and then have a random delayed beep for when the shot is going to occur. If you have a shot timer that lets you run multiple beeps, that is fantastic. You can also download apps that give you a random signal or beep so that you can press the shot when that beep occurs. Another way to do it is to start moving, maintain your sight picture, and then have another person use a whistle or some type of beep for you to press the shot when that occurs. It's very important during this drill to keep moving. Don't stop on the beep or slow down on the beep. Pick a speed that you can maintain a reasonable sight picture on the target. It is going to wobble more than usual, but try to keep it in that acceptable scoring area. Once you have that consistent wobble down, keep that speed consistent the whole way through, even when the beep occurs. You'll then find over time that you're able to pick up the speed more and more and maintain that acceptable sight picture on target. It goes without saying that when you are learning this skill, you are going to be going at a snail's pace to keep your sight picture on target, and that is okay. Right here, I've got an A-zone steel setup. All I'm going to be doing is moving frontwards and backwards towards and away from the target, and I'm going to click my shot timer that's going to give me 4 random beeps. Once we've done a lot of these drills where we're keeping our sight picture through the whole movement process and shooting when we're being told to, it's very easy to then extrapolate that skill and shoot when we want to while moving. That's a pretty consistent and slow speed that I can land repeatable hits on that target. Now let's see what happens when I pick up the pace and see if the wheels start coming off. So in this shooting scenario, I'm running between about 10 meters front and back from an A-zone steel, and that's giving me 7 out of 8 hits in the A-zone. I missed low and left on that last round, so in this shooting scenario, it may be worth it for me to shoot and move. But let's see what happens when I start picking up the speed to a level where I'm basically running. So that was 5 out of 8, maybe 4 out of 8 if my kindergarten counting skills are on point. And we're at a level of speed there where that might be beneficial in a defensive encounter if we're moving laterally. That might tip the scales there in terms of the difficulty of the opponent hitting back at you. But my accuracy went down significantly, and that's not a comfortable or confident speed for me to land accurate rounds on an A-zone target. Hopefully you can see in a real life context that the speed that I'm moving front and back from the target isn't going to be very helpful. My perspective of the movement is that I'm moving very quickly because my sights are moving all over the place, but in reality, I'm really not moving that fast. Now let me show you what happens if I move at 100% speed away from this target, just like a real life scenario, and I'm just going to launch a volley of rounds. Zero out of 7 or 8. What if I do that same thing laterally on the target now? That was about 1 out of another 8. The reason why I just wasted all those rounds for you guys is to show that it's not a realistic expectation to be able to move at top speed and land accurate hits into a good preferred scoring area. It's just not going to happen. The unfortunate thing with this is that that is the speed that we would likely have to move at in a defensive or real life context for that movement itself to be beneficial to us in regards to dodging bullets. Again, the context and shooting scenario dictates. If this was a large D-zone sized target, I might have landed 70–80% of my rounds at that speed. But now I have 30% of my rounds going off target that I'm accountable for. And this isn't good in any situation. This is a very small target that demands high accuracy, which means that in this context, for me to maintain that high accuracy demand, I now need to scale down my speed. And if I'm scaling down my speed, why am I moving at all? With that in mind, it might be best for us to choose between the two. Instead of shooting and moving, is it better for me to shoot accurately, or is it better for me right now to move quickly? Now let's get into moving laterally. When we're moving laterally, we want to try to keep our feet pointed in the direction of travel and then tank turn our upper body to maintain our sight picture as we're moving. If we're moving a large lateral distance, there's going to come a point where our upper body is going to be contorted to a point where it's not beneficial for us to maintain it. All we need to do when we reach that nasty contorted spot is to pivot on that lead leg, which allows us to move our hips in the opposite direction and start walking backwards. Now we need to go toe to heel. Like we talked about in the stance lesson, this is going to introduce a lot of stress and muscle exertion to maintain our sight picture while we're moving laterally. So that's how we can work at building the skill of shooting and moving. Now let's get into moving quickly into position and prepping for that shot when we get there. Right here I've got a cone that I'm going to sprint up to at Usain Bolt speed. And then when I near the position, I'm going to press the brakes and start sitting into my stance. That's going to slow me down and absorb the shock of stopping in that position. As I near the cone, I'm going to start prepping my trigger and sight picture so that when I get into position, all the work has been done and all I need to do now is actually press the trigger. Which can be summarized like this. Sprint, 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 sit, 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 sit. Sprint, 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 sit, 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 sit. To display the time difference in shooting and moving, I did 3 different demos. Each demo consists of 6 rounds while moving around this set of cones. The first demo is moving quickly and then slowing down to take a shot. The second is constant slow movement to maintain a sight picture and pressing the rounds in between the cones. The third is moving quickly into position to land a shot from a static point. You can see that the constant movement option was the slowest of all 3 by a few seconds, but the situation dictates. If you need to hold a sight picture because you may need to land a round at any point, then this would be your only option. If not, the other options might be the best of both worlds. Getting in and out of position and keeping a sight picture while moving are both things that we're going to be practicing during our dry fire workouts. Again, this is something that we need to get experience doing so that we can see how much we can get away with. We can then use that data and apply it to the context.